TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Today on CityCast Chicago, Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson butt heads over migrant shelters. Illinois remains behind on renewable energy goals. And get ready for nearly 1 trillion cicadas nationwide. Yes, that's trillion with a T. Here to help me make sense of it all, Injustice Watch's Alejandra Cancino and WTTW's Amanda Vinicky. It's Friday, January 26th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Morning, Alejandra.
Hi, good morning.
Happy to have you back. Morning, Amanda.
Hey, I love being with you, and you know it.
I appreciate y'all. Y'all have both been on the show a combined 20 times, and we're always excited when you come back. Across Chicago, people have been talking about Restaurant Week as it's still going on for another week and a half. And this week on the show, we talked a little bit about some of the Chicago restaurants that hold us down year long, serving up some of the best tacos this city has to offer. So Amanda, I'm going to start with you. With Restaurant Week upon us, is there a restaurant you're excited to get in there and get that little deal, even though I'm not going to lie, sometimes after enough of the appetizers and drinks, the deal part kind of wash out.
That is true. But you know what? Restaurants really need our love right now. So I'm okay with it. It's dreary. I feel like sometimes I go outside and nobody's out and about, and I don't blame them. It's either foggy or icy or snowy or, sub-zero temps.
Or rainy or gloomy or nasty.
Yeah, all of the above. So actually, I'm going to be going to a restaurant that is in my neighborhood. Kama, I think is how you pronounce it.
Okay.
Kama. And it is an Indian restaurant. And so I'm really pumped to try that. We were between that and Bloom, which is really right down the street. It is
the Bloom Plant-Based Kitchen?
Yes, the Plant-Based Kitchen. I've been there before, though, so we decided on the other one because I've been to Bloom and love it. Not a vegetarian, but highly recommend.
Alejandra, I want to bring you in here because when we talked about restaurant weeks before we start recording, you was like, okay, I might just be going to the restaurant down the street that serve your favorite tacos. And earlier this week, we, myself, our producers went on our own mini tacos to try to find our favorite. Mine right now is coming out of Asian Cuisine Express in Little Village. The fish taco, the shrimp taco, that Monday Dollar Al Pastor did it for me. So for you, what's the restaurant in your neighborhood that you love to go pick up your tacos from?
Well, I gotta tell you first that to me, a good taco means really good tortillas. If you give me yesterday's tortillas, I'm gonna notice they're gonna be stale, they're gonna break in my hand. That's not a good taco. So for the best tacos in Chicago, I go to Chile Toreado, which is in McKinley Park. It's walking distance. It's nice and cozy in there. A lot of the times, the tortillas are actually handmade, which makes me always feel like I'm back in Guatemala and I'm, 9 years old eating my tacos. Yeah.
Every single week, we like to bring in our friends to look back on some of the biggest stories that were taking place in Chicago this week and beyond. Alejandra, let's start with you. We've been talking for the last almost 2 years about how Chicago is trying or failing at providing resources for, what is it, over 30,000 asylum seekers that arrived in Chicago during this time. And this week, there was some news that migrants have started being housed in an apartment complex in Woodlawn. And while this could look like a great step towards more permanent housing, this story also came with some concerns. Can you catch our listeners up?
Yeah, so this is a story about a family of immigrants. There's 7 of them, including 2 children, who were placed in a building that the city of Chicago took to housing court because of building code violations. So let me tell you a little bit of how that works, right? Like essentially, like if there are issues in a building, a lot of the times what happens is that residents will call 311. 311 will ping the city's building department. The city's building department will send inspectors. Inspectors will inspect the building. And depending on what they find, the city will either send the building to administrative hearings, or to circuit court. In this case, this building is in both. It's in administrative hearings and
Mm-hmm.
circuit court because of those violations. This is the building where this family was placed. Is placed through a state program, right? It's a state program that is providing housing for immigrants for about 6 months. And they have been there since September. What happens is that this is in this particular case, it's a building in which the tenants have been petitioning the court to be part of the case, and the tenants believe that the city essentially is not doing enough. This is why they want to talk to the judge themselves and tell the judge what they are seeing with their apartments. The case has gotten increasingly more contentious as time has gone on. There was a argument between the judge and one of the tenants early on in the case, and after that argument, essentially it's become more and more difficult. The tenants say it has become more and more difficult for them to actually be in court. What I observed last week, there were 2 hearings. At one of the hearings, the judge essentially threatened to send the tenants to jail if he found that they were lying to him about the conditions of the building. Because of what the tenants brought up at the hearing, the city sent inspectors again, and they found this Venezuelan family with a pipe that had burst and water in their basement. And at the time, they had turned off the heat because they felt that it was getting too close to the heating unit. As we all know, we were in below freezing temperatures last week, so it was pretty cold in their apartment.
I'm not sure how these court hearings typically go, but it doesn't feel common for a judge to be engaging in arguments, threatening to jail people. But also, the tenants have brought forth not only longstanding complaints, but some evidence when we're talking about pest infestation, plumbing and electrical issues, terrible drinking water. So what led to this, to the point where this judge is essentially threatening to jail these individuals who claim that their landlords Ariel and Raphael Lowenstein haven't provided livable conditions?
Part of what is happening here is that the tenants have been, the hearings have been happening on Zoom. And so the tenants, when they have felt that the record doesn't reflect their lived experience, they have been unmuting themselves on Zoom, even though they have an attorney present, and they have been openly speaking to court, to the judge, really, about what they are seeing. It is not customary for tenants to speak when their turn is not to speak before the judge, right? Like the judge has to essentially give you permission to speak in court. I think from what I have observed, it's really interesting because the first hearing that happened in this case was back in October, and the judge was essentially gave the tenants a lot of hope about what was happening. He calmed them down. He heard the tenants. He told them, not to worry, that he was going to attend the inspection himself. Then there was an inspection, and he did go to the building, attended the inspection himself. And then he came back at the next court hearing and essentially told the tenants this isn't that bad. And that is when one of the tenant leaders unmuted herself and said, no, the conditions are bad. They are dangerous. And the judge said, no, they are not dangerous and hazardous conditions in this building. And, I do think it's complicated because if the city and the judge were to deem this building dangerous and hazardous, the legal pathway is to shut down the building. And if they shut down the building, where are all these
It
tenants going to
displaces
go?
all of these families.
Right. And the judge has said in court that it is, he has explained that it's really difficult to find apartments for tenants who are, looking for places that are affordable. It was really after that argument with the tenant leader that things started deteriorated in court. And he got to the point last week where he threatened to jail the tenants if he found that they were lying. And this speaks about how complicated it is to be in housing court, how complicated and mind-boggling it is to be part of this program, right? When you're being placed in neighborhoods that you don't really know. And I do think, the state is doing what it can in placing tenants for 6 months in these apartment buildings. And it speaks about, the not only the quality of housing in the city of Chicago, the lack of affordable housing in the city of Chicago, that a sitting judge is telling us that it's really difficult for the city to place residents who are living in dangerous conditions. And then the response from the state that essentially now that we have these immigrants coming in and also trying to take that limited amount of affordable housing, who is responsible for the tenants when they are placed in buildings that are in these difficult conditions?
Now that we have more and more asylum seekers looking for shelter, we've seen where the city has been sort of steering them to this point, which is why I want to bring you in here, Amanda. The tensions between Mayor Brandon Johnson and Governor J.B. Pritzker are rising because, the mayor says they don't have any plans at this very moment to open new shelters. But as people are arriving and an eviction deadline may be coming up next week, it's creating more and more confusion here.
I think it goes beyond confusion. I mean, I think it's truly stressful particularly for residents who are in these shelters and don't know what's going to happen. The deadline to be evicted has already been extended, and I think there are very few who would argue with that, given, as Alejandra pointed out, it was sub-zero temperatures last week in Chicago. The program that we've been talking about, in which the state helps for folks to stay once they're out of shelters in apartments or rental housing for 6 months, will be shortened. It's going to be halved to 3 months. So you're seeing, I think, just like I said, beyond confusion, it is true stress, and there aren't any good answers. When you talk about not only the Johnson administration, this is something that they have not pushed back against. They have used the term right sizing what they are doing with the shelters. So not only is that potentially that there won't be additional beds not coming online, but right sizing appears to also be fewer beds. So are we looking at potentially closing of shelters going forward? We really don't know. There are not any good answers. And I think you get to that. There's also this tension between the city and state. I'm not sure whether that is personality driven. I'm not in on these meetings. The mayor asked after the city council meeting, are you at odds with the governor? And he didn't say so. I think you have both been really trying to push from that narrative. But it's clear that there's tension between.
No one wants to be seen sort of holding the ball when the buzzer goes off, right? No one wants to be seen that way.
Honestly, Jacoby, I wonder how much of it is that this is two politicians. They are just that. You cannot separate politics ever from this. Particularly, you have the governor with higher aspirations. The mayor is new and is
just wants to get through the first term.
To get through the first term. There's been a lot of questions. He admitted about his, quote, style or leadership. And so how much of this is pointing fingers to insulate one administration from the other and then nobody really fully taking action? Is it that it's a new mayor and getting up to speed on a very difficult issue and there just isn't the infrastructure there? Is it just that the city and therefore the state are sort of drowning in questions about what to do with these people? I think many of those can be true at the same time. But what is clear as these tensions boil over into the public is that if that's what we're seeing from the public, my assumption, and I'm a reporter, I don't like to make assumptions, but exactly, you have to think, what does it say about behind closed doors? I'll add that existing tension is the city wanting the state to come through with promised bed space and the state saying, sure, but we can't just do that. We need to know where to do so, and is waiting on answers from the city. So there is, again, a lot of frustration on both sides of this, as you have, it's not just tension, it's also, it seems, sort of a stalemate with nothing moving forward.
I mean, let's stay on the case of housing. Last week, we talked with Amethyst, the founder of the Harvey World Herald, who provided us context on a string of social media videos we saw throughout the holidays in which residents at an apartment complex were essentially boarded up inside of their home after the township had deemed the building to be unlivable, which, tenants had been complaining time and time again that the building needed improvement. And so even getting to this point was heartbreaking. Alejandra, were there any updates this week as tenants were scrambling to find somewhere to live?
Sadly, the same thing is still what's happening, right? That the tenants are still trying to find a place to live. When there's sometimes when they're, earlier this week, the tenants were still trying to figure it out. I think it's so interesting to me that part of the reasons why the tenants haven't been able to find a place to live is because it's so expensive to move. So it's so expensive to rent an apartment in the city, but also moving out of your apartment, right? Like the Sun Times has written this story about how there are so many fees and the fees continue to accumulate.
I mean, moving fees. And then, we all know that first month is more expensive than any of the other months with your security deposit, with your move-in fee. Some people want first month's rent.
Right. We're talking about now more and more landlords are moving to a moving fee as opposed to a security deposit. And I think that's really interesting, right? Chicago has an ordinance that requires landlords to keep your security deposit, and while they have it in their hands, you're supposed to be accumulating interest. And so at the end of your lease, the landlord is supposed to give you back your security deposit with interest. But the thing is that landlords have complained for a very long time that not only keeping the security deposit, but giving it back to the tenant with this little amount of interest is something that is becoming increasingly difficult for them. So instead, they're moving to this moving fee, right? Which means the tenants are not getting it back, which means if you're a tenant who's used to I get my security deposit and then I'll go to my next apartment and I'll use that security deposit to hold my next place. Well, you can't do that anymore, right? Like now you have to come up with all the money up front. The first month, the last month, the moving fee, the movers, all of that adds up. And for, people who are low income, as we all know, that's extremely complicated. And I'll say that this speaks to me. I keep going back to the promises that the city has made to low income tenants. And the promises were that when public housing was destroyed, that the tenants were going to be able to go to better housing that was owned by private landlords, that was going to be maintained by private landlords. There's going to be better housing. And I think that we see the situations in Harvey, we see the situations in Woodlawn, and we see so many other buildings that are in housing court where tenants, some of them are paying market rates, some of them are there with subsidized housing. But the promise, to me, it speaks to the promise not being kept.
The city and the state had a responsibility through public housing, and they still didn't live up to it. And then they said, you know what? The private market, the market will take care of you. And now you think of Harvey, for example, the private market failed them. The tenants come back to the city and say, what will you do to help us? And they go, well, this wasn't our responsibility. It was that, we didn't know anything about this. That's on them. All right, we can do what we can now. It ultimately strips accountability from the state while leaving the public even more vulnerable to both exploitation and neglect with what seems like no route for both solvency or improvement. And so I'm glad that we're spending more time here. We'll continue to update you. And again, please tap in with the Harvey World Herald. You could tap into Alejandra's reporting about the Woodlawn apartment complex in our show notes, as well as bookmarking Injustice Watch. We've heard so much over the last few years, especially on the campaign trails, about what the city and the state is doing to move towards more renewable energy sources. And Pritzker has touted, right, the opening of several plants, or the soon to be open plants across Illinois. And yet it still seems like the state is behind on its long-term renewable energy goals. Can you let us know what's going on here?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on with energy policy right now in terms of shifting priorities at the Illinois Commerce Commission, which helps to set rates for what we all pay for natural gas, for electricity. There's, of course, the ComEd trial that went on and continued questions in terms of what the role utilities, which are, sort of virtually monopolies, hence they're regulated by the state, have played in Illinois' history of corruption. And sort of grouped in with all of that, you have the state really trying to make efforts and toward moving toward renewable energy resources. And in fact, this big law known as CEJA that requires the state do just that. But Illinois is behind. So this, as you noted, Jacoby, even as Illinois is making a lot of inroads and sort of winning companies that are going to be making solar panels and, having to do with the creation of renewable energy. But I just think this is evidence of passage of a law that was hard fought for, but the difficulty in execution and compounding all of these concerns is what it means for the grid. Illinois is not alone in trying to move toward energy resources, and there are persisting questions of, can it be done, and can it be done with the infrastructure as is. I recently covered, for example, the CPS being awarded a grant to purchase electric school buses. Chicago is going to be able to deal with that, and it's not as if they're all electric school buses, but the infrastructure to charge the individual buses in rural communities, will they be able to get to and from and go long distances without having the chargers? And again, is the grid capable of it? So that's not to say that it is incapable. It is just to say that there is a whole lot of energy being poured into energy policy, and there are not necessarily the answers to all these overriding questions, which is contributing to Illinois lagging behind on those goals that are in a law the state itself passed.
Before we let Alejandra and Amanda go, we've got to sing together. Every week, every episode ends with some good news. Come on. See, that's how I'm going to transition to it, because by saying we're going to sing together, it sort of put the spotlight on them. It was like, hold on, he ain't tell us nothing about this. Alejandra, what is your good news for the people today?
Well, you got to know that I mostly grew up in Miami, and seeing my windows not being frozen for the first time in like more than a week made me really happy this morning. It has finally thawed, and it makes me so happy.
What do you do when we get into those below zero temperatures? I know you've been here for a little bit, you've adjusted a bit, but what do you do to kind of get some of that Miami spirit? What do you do to think about brighter and warmer days?
I mean, I plan a vacation most of the time. I just I refuse to go out, so I don't really feel it. And I decide where we're going to go next year on a crazy adventure. We pick Hawaii this year, so pretty excited.
Come on. Ooh. Amanda, moving over to you. What is your good news?
I'm going to cheat. I've got two, Jacoby. So, all right, for starters, we began talking about restaurants and all the fun things that are going on there and Restaurant Week. I'm going to also say congratulations to all of the chefs that are finalists for Beard Awards. We're talking about like the Grammys and Oscars and all that.
It's award season.
Nah. What I care about is the food awards, because these are folks who, are they're behind the scenes. We don't see them on a big screen. So let's celebrate them and elevate them. And I especially think it's got to be cool for those who are starting. And so shout out particularly to Woodlawn, whose chef is up for the Best Emerging Chef Award. Sort of the counter of that, my second piece of good news, and I might be eating my words, but I'm saying
it's a complete shift.
Total shift. Cicadas are coming. And I know that there are a lot of people that are probably saying, like, screaming and fearful of that news. I am pumped. It is going to be not just one, but evidently two broods. And
the Great Southern Brood and the Northern Illinois Brood. Yep.
So U of I has a lot of insect experts, and evidently a cicada one as well, who is also looking forward to this, because this is an occurrence that happens only once every 221 years to have these particular monster broods coming together. So I like I said, I might eat my words, because
a trillion cicadas
it's gonna get
across the country. I still remember, I don't know if y'all remember the first time you saw them, but I remember walking out of my back door as a kid after the emergence of cicadas having, of course, I wasn't watching the news at that time. I was not prepared. I did not know what was going on. And I remember walking outside and looking down and seeing all of these holes in the ground. And I was so concerned, so scared, looking throughout the backyard. I was like, what is happening? And then I heard this sound and I looked up because the sound was almost so ubiquitous. Like it was so loud that I almost didn't notice it because it was just like, okay, that's just outside.
It's so present. It's like white noise.
And I looked
not.
up to this big tree behind our house, and every inch of this tree was absolutely covered. And I mean, for months after that, there were just cicada shells everywhere because they mate and then they die and they leave all of their nasty shells behind. Well, obviously you talked with some experts who wouldn't see it that way. So let me say, and then they leave their sort of beautifully intact shells behind.
There we go. That's
it was one of the scariest things I ever seen as a kid. I really thought it was some apocalypse.
But they don't bite. You
type.
know what I mean? Like they're nice. It'd be one thing if they were, I don't know, eating our homes.
No, if they were mosquito based or if they had some sort of termite ability. I feel
they're
you.
Not.
Nah.
And you can eat them, right?
There we go. Yes.
Aren't there some cultures where you can actually prepare them?
Totally.
They're a local delicacy.
No, that sounds about right. They look packed with protein, I guess. We talking about eating crickets. I came up on an entomology TikTok, and so I respect it. I understand that for some people this is the most exciting thing, that in their lifetime they're going to see something that the next generation, the next 2 generations might not see. But dog, it's terrifying. $1 trillion of anything sound terrifying, even dollars. I'm like, why you got that? That's terrible type of accumulation. So, hey, cicadas, no longer frozen windows. Hey, we like range on this program. We like range. And so I'm gonna finish us off. And my good news, even though I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get tickets to this, hearing that Andre 3000, Mr. Benjamin, 3 Stacks is coming to Chicago to perform multiple shows. February 12th at Talia Hall, February 13th at Salt Shed, and February 15th at Garfield Park Conservatory. It really brightened my day. I am like so many other Andre 3000 fans that eats up anything he puts out, any feature, any quote, any interview, and even a bunch of random flute sounds. I absolutely love Andre 3000. Always in my top 3 rappers of all time, musicians of all time. And so while the tickets are sold out at most of the venues, I do believe a couple of them will have some walk-up tickets available. So if you're interested, get in on that. Have any of y'all listened to the new Andre 3000 yet?
I have. I really like it.
New Blue Sun I just love the fact that he is not sort of a quote unquote expert at the instrument and is just in a position in his life where he's like, me and my friends got together and they was like, I should put this out. I love that for him and I love that for us.
I have faith that you're going to get tickets, Jacoby. I have faith. Listen to this excitement. You gotta. Somebody listen. Help Jacoby out.
I want to give a huge thank you to our guest today, senior reporter with Injustice Watch, Alejandra Cancino, and WTTW state reporter, Amanda Vinicky. Thank y'all both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, I want to give a huge shout out to the people who make CityCast Chicago possible. Our executive producer is Simone Alicea. Our producer is Michelle Navarro. Our newsletter editor is Sydney Madden. The music we all love is from Sam Thousand, All the Kimonos, and Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop. If you enjoy CityCast Chicago even just half as much as we love making it, share it with your friends and family, rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, and make sure you tap into chicago.citycast.fm. We're going to be back here bright and early on Monday. We'll talk to you then. Peace. That's what I was going to say. I like to put things out into the CityCast ether and maybe somebody could come through for me.
I'm sorry I'm not that gal, but I wish.
Hey, maybe give me a couple. I got to hook Michelle up too. Michelle want to go too, y'all. So let me know.